Thanks again to the three of you for returning for one last conversation. Let's focus for a moment now on our state's most populous area. That's Bernalillo County, of course. Voters there chose to reelect Democratic House Speaker Javier Martinez. At the same time, Republican Jay Block won Senate District 12. That was once held by longtime state Democrat Senator Jerry Ortiz y Pino. Merritt, you talked about this briefly, but did state Republicans make inroads in Bernalillo County specifically, and how?
Well, I mean, certainly, uh, when you go from Senator Ortiz y Pino to an election denier, that's quite a switch, isn't it? So, uh, one could say that's a drastic change, but that's also a change wrought by redistricting. You know, there were some strong contenders. I felt like Kirsten Johnson ran a very good race, but was still unsuccessful. And Bernalillo County has been pretty solidly blue for several cycles now. And I think that's a real shame. I think we need to hear other voices in Bernalillo County and how we break this lock, this chokehold. We see it in municipal government. You know, we have a conservative majority on the city council. I don't know how we break through and get the right voices in. And we see it, you know, in the East Mountains, which is pretty solidly red. We see it in Valencia County, in Belen and Las Lunas. You see Republican legislators. So I don't know what it is about the Albuquerque city limits where Republicans can't really seem to make inroads, because of course Senator-elect Block is in Sandoval County, the Rio Rancho area, which tends to run more Republican. So, you know, we see the suburbs are more Republican. The city center is more Democratic. So I don't know if that's reflecting just the rest of the country. I'm not sure what that is, but I think definitely we need to see a more moderate Republican tone. I think it needs to be definitely more center right, maybe rather than far right. You know, and if you look at the legislators who had been successful, those are the voices and the tones that I think that we heard from them. So we'll have to look for 2026 and see what can be pulled off there.
Okay. Now, in her recent special session, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham proposed public safety bills that you mentioned, Dan. Most of the support was from state Republicans on those during that special. Democrats still have the majority, of course. We've talked about that. You referenced the influence an all woman or majority woman legislature might have on this, but what about the slight uptick from Republicans too? Do you think that there'll be any momentum for the governor on those public safety measures?
Well, I think we were watching. I mean, the possibility that if Kamala Harris won, that the governor could have been appointed to her cabinet. You know, we didn't know that for sure, but I think there was a lot of speculation about that. Obviously, we know now that that's not going to be the case. So we're going to see what these next 2 years look like before her second term expires. I do think at the legislature there's maybe not a consensus, but a feeling that crime is more of an Albuquerque issue than a New Mexico issue. And I think, as Merritt mentioned, the fact that Democrats control nearly all the legislative seats in Albuquerque now, I think that will be interesting to see if the governor, you know, over the next 2 months before the session starts, can find some common ground, can, you know, maybe build a little bit of momentum for some of these proposals. Certainly in the special session this summer, you know, that didn't happen. And we saw that there wasn't much of an appetite from the legislature and even Democratic leadership in taking up the governor's proposals. So I think there's a possibility that we do see more conflict between the governor and members of her own party than we have certainly over her first term. But I think that could continue unless they're able to kind of try to reach some common ground before the session, before the session begins.
Okay. Now, overall, voter turnout in New Mexico fell slightly, with 66% of eligible voters casting a ballot. That's a drop from 2020. 68% voted in that election. This was an election cycle where every other political ad, it seemed like, had apocalyptic overtones. Eric, despite that, fewer people voted. Why do you think that was?
You know, there's a lot of speculation going on and a lot of soul searching going on in the Democratic Party. You know, Republican turnout was higher and as you mentioned earlier, in most counties, the performance was much better for them, a couple of points, some 5 points in some counties. So Republicans turned out for sure. I think that there's a few theories about what might have been going on. Certainly, you can't underestimate the sort of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party being, disappointed in Vice President Harris not taking a stronger position on Gaza. I think this effort to sort of move in a much more sort of centrist Republican way, and campaigning with Liz Cheney, and the strategy to sort of tack right. There's a growing sentiment in the Democratic Party that maybe that was the wrong move, right? To try to, because if you look at the numbers, we really didn't capture a lot of those folks that they were trying to capture. Whether it was independents or moderate Republicans or whoever the targets were there. So I think that there'll be a lot of deconstructing, a lot of they called it autopsies, whatever metaphor you want to use that's not too crass, is that what exactly Bernie Sanders just put out a pretty hard-hitting sort of condemnation of the strategy, which is we lost the white working class, and it's because we're not speaking to their issues. We're not talking about what things that are bread and butter economic issues, pocketbook issues for working folks, and that was borne out in the groups that moved to Trump, moved from Harris to Trump, or moved from Biden to Trump, right? So I think we're gonna have to do a soul searching. New Mexico's a little bit of an island, a little bit of a blue island now. We have a strong majority in both houses, pretty much every state office in Democratic hands. So, but that's right now. And if this trend continues, I think, as others have said, we may have to do some tactical changes in messaging and in priorities, and who we're talking to and who we're taking for granted. We haven't talked about Latino men, and I just want to make sure that we talk about that, because they overwhelmingly, including in New Mexico, but across the country, moved to Trump, and I think that's the biggest question in the mind of most folks, like what happened there, and how is it that, and you're including first generation, second generation immigrant Hispanic and Latino men, like what was that about? And I think again, it all boiled down to pocketbook and economic issues. I think I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching to be done in the Democratic Party at all levels, from the top down to the local level.
Okay. And I'll get to some of the local stuff in just a second here, but I want to stay on that in the Latino men, because Bernie Sanders' statement, he did touch on those working class voters, minority working class voters, moving away from the Democratic Party. And it wasn't just the price of eggs that, did this. It's also, it's how people measure their worth in a capitalist society is what kind of money they're making for their families. So how did the Democratic Party fail in that regard? And is it as easy as changing messaging in the next 2 years ahead of the midterms to fix that?
Well, I think it has to be more than framing and sort of changing the narrative and doing what all the sort of the messaging experts talk about. That's important, right? You've got to have a clear message, but I think it's a policy change, right? I don't think that we have leaned in enough at the national level to some of these basic working classes. The message that Bernie Sanders, who was, and when he ran, this was a central part of his message, and also Elizabeth Warren. It was really about, like, what are we doing for working families, not as a sort of a campaign cliche, but like, what are the tangible policy options we're doing? Things like paid family leave, things like raising the minimum wages, not marginally, but drastically. Things like really holding corporations much more accountable for not just environmental issues, but for working standards and so on. Things like supporting more the rights to collectively bargain and so on. So I think that there was a lot of work. To be fair, Biden tried to do a lot more of that, but I just don't think it came across. And I just have to say, honestly, that they when you have Elon Musk and you have the Russians and you have a lot of folks helping you sort of perpetuate this message in social media, which I think nobody's talking about, at least at least locally, that was a big factor, right? My daughter showed me some TikToks. I was like, how in the world? And it worked with younger voters. That's the other group that really swung shockingly for Trump, right? Because that very very personal, rational, economic choice that we all have. Like, how am I doing in my job? How's my family doing? And all this other noise, personalities, all the anti-immigrant, all of that really boiled down for a lot of folks, Hispanic men, younger voters, others like white working class voters. How am I doing? How am I doing? How am I paying the bills? And how's my life? And I think, that's not rocket science. That's the economy is stupid. We've talked about for years, but I think it just really, this election really underscored maybe some failings there in the Democratic Party.
Now, Dan, further down the ballot, there are issues that feel like they are within voters' control. For example, in Albuquerque, voters supported conservation efforts of the Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District. Were there any other local ballot issues that stood out to you around the state?
One that was interesting to me, obviously, all the state bonds passed, 4 proposed constitutional amendments passed. There was one that was actually pretty close about whether the UNM law school dean can appoint kind of a nominee to the judicial commission, and that one only narrowly passed. So I'm not sure kind of if there were some behind the scenes issues going on there, but all the other ones, that I saw passed by a large margin. And I did just want to return briefly to the turnout issue that Eric was talking about. One thing, that I thought was interesting was even same-day voter registration, which the state just implemented recently, and a lot of Republicans were opposed to it when it passed. But in this election, we actually saw more Republicans who use same-day voter registration than Democrats. So maybe some of those economic bread and butter kind of issues like Eric was talking about, or attracting younger voters. But I think, in that area, Republicans were able to, their ground game was more successful than Democrats.
Okay. Now, Merritt, I asked this question of Dan a little bit earlier in the show, but as we get close to wrapping up here, I want your take on where the GOP sits in New Mexico right now. What does the party have to do to continue the momentum that we saw in this election? And will it always be tied to Trump?
And it's so funny that you're asking me this question, because since the last time I was on this show, I'm an independent. I read the 2024 Republican platform, and I saw myself nowhere in there. The Republican Party is no longer conservative. The Republican Party is populist and is co-opting a lot of very common, what have been typical Democratic themes. And that's why I think what this election was so confusing is Harris and Trump were kind of saying the same thing. It was just, who did you believe more? Who did you find more compelling? And so RPNM, I think, is perhaps struggling with the same messaging, and it's struggling with the same identity crisis, is who are we and what do we stand for and who are we going to support? And so I think the real question then becomes, what comes after Trump? Is MAGA dead? Because particularly in southern and more rural areas, MAGA is fairly popular in New Mexico. It's not me, but this isn't about me. And we see nationally the people like Romney, other folks like that who decline to endorse, and you can tell they're waiting for this to all be over, and then they're going to go back and fix the party, right? I'm not sure that the party's going to still be there for them to fix the way they want to. So I think this is going to be a lot of watching and waiting and talking and listening and finding out what voters want. So I don't know what the Republican Party is going to become, or if I'm going to want to be part of it. But I think there has to be a new message for voters. And I think there has to be an appeal to voters that moves beyond Trump and moves beyond a single individual and an identity-based, an individual. And they've got to get a brand and a value system that can endure for the next 5 or 6 decades.
Understood. It was really great talking to all of you. Dan Boyd, Capitol Bureau Chief of the Albuquerque Journal, Merritt Allen, Vox Optima Public Relations, and former Democratic State Senator Eric Riego. Thank you, guys.